welcome to the show. Today, we're going to talk about NAMI. A lot of you know what NAMI is. It's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And we have two wonderful members of our local NAMI chapter here to talk with us today about what they do and its importance to our community. So I want to thank very much for being here with me, Jan Urton and David Beck. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we have our own local chapter here. And you meet. Tell us about the organization.
Okay, well, we have monthly meetings here in McMinnville on the first Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. at Abacus House, which is on the corner of 6th and Galloway. And during those meetings, we provide information to members about all kinds of things relating to mental illness. And then there are also support groups that meet. And I don't know if we want to go into the details right now.
Well, we have a lot to talk about around support groups. You have a lot of them.
Yes.
But I think a lot of people in the organization have come to it because somehow mental illness is affecting them or their family members.
Correct.
I myself had cousins that had schizophrenia, so it's been close to me. I know that you work, Jan, with many people that you support many people that have mental illness or mental illness in their family. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's like?
Well, having someone with mental illness means that, just like with any other illness, you have concerns about them, you want them to do well, you want to try to support them in the best way you can, but without really understanding what's going on, it can be very challenging. And unfortunately, for mental illness, because it affects how we think, our thinking skills, it affects behavior because how we think affects our behavior. And so we can be challenged because we think someone is just being mean or rude or angry with no apparent reason or not a reason that seems reasonable to us. And so we can often interact in negative ways, which then affects our relationship. So keeping the relationship with a family member and being able to listen to them and them feel heard, and at the same time them to be willing to listen to what you have to say is really important. But it's a challenge.
And so the local support group helps people with their interpersonal relationships, helping people solve the problems that they have.
Right.
NAMI does that. And David, you also address national societal problems. How does mental illness, what's its effect on society?
Let me set the stage a bit for you. I think it's really important to know what we're talking about and how broadly it affects us. By mental illness, let's just do a little bit of name calling, so to speak. We're talking about illnesses such as depressive illnesses, such as bipolar illness. We're talking about psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia. We're talking about anxiety disorders such as panic disorder. We're talking about personality disorders such as borderline personality. We're talking about things like obsessive compulsive disorder. We're talking about things like post-traumatic stress syndrome. This is there's a whole range of other disorders that fit into this constellation. The key thing to understand is that these collectively are a very pervasive family of illnesses, and I can guarantee anyone who's watching that they know someone with a mental illness. There is, on the average, 1 in 4 people suffer from an episode of a mental illness during the course of any 1 year. And on the average, 1 in 17 people suffer from a severe mental illness, such as manic depressive illness or schizophrenia. And so the range of impacts is really substantial. In a county like Yamhill County, with the number of people that we have here, that means there are about 6,000 people suffering from mental illness. And the cost to our society is really substantial. The cost of not supporting and providing care is even more substantial. And so in the context of an illness like that in our midst. We have a huge need for an organization like NAMI to provide support. That's in addition to what the government programs already provide through things like the Yamhill County Department of Health and Mental
Health and Human
Health and
Services,
Human Services.
right?
Thank you very much, Jan. In addition to those kind of programs, NAMI provides a hugely important adjunct through its programs, as you said, advocacy, education, and support.
Well, it's a difficult problem, otherwise we would have solved it. And there
Right.
are various means to help, and we hear a lot about pharmaceuticals. You know, it's a kind of an unkind thing people say sometimes. You sound like you're off your meds.
Mhm.
And I think this is part of the stigma that you address
Right.
with mental illness. People kind of using these terms pejoratively.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit more about stigma and how maybe we should be more aware of that?
Yeah, well, stigma comes from some ignorance, not lack of knowledge, and it can also come from misinformation that we've heard. So because there is a stigma about mental illness, people are often reluctant to talk about it or tell that they have family members or friends or that they themselves have a mental illness, because they don't want to be that person, that crazy person that, went off their meds. But the other thing is, when we do talk about it, oftentimes we talk about it in pejorative ways, one of which you just mentioned. And even in our everyday language, oh, you're crazy, you're nuts. And more recently, I think even some of the diagnostic terms have been thrown around a lot. Oh yeah, he's bipolar, meaning he's mad today and he was happy yesterday. Or she's schizo, or, so I think without necessarily understanding the full extent of that, people sometimes throw those terms around, which then makes it harder to talk about in a reasonable way. And I think about, many years ago, cancer was an illness that people were reluctant to talk about. And if a family member had it, you just kind of kept it quiet and you only told people you could kind of
That
trust.
has really changed, hasn't it?
And-
So that's a good model for how we can change from the stigma of cancer. Has really, people talk about it all the time now. It's not, I think
Right.
it's lost a lot of that. Hopefully we're on that same path with mental illness. That
We hope.
Right.
We hope.
We'll move along that path.
Ken, a thing that's important to understand about he's offered meds or she's offered meds or something like that is that somebody actually had the opportunity to get medication, and that requires care. That requires access to someone who can provide that kind of care. The quote-unquote meds aren't something you just can buy over the counter in a drugstore. The access to care is a critical component of that notion of meds. And the other thing that's really critical to understand is that medication is not, unfortunately, a magic bullet. It doesn't cure everything or make everything go away and improve things. It's a constant battle. Medication levels, medication types are constantly need to be adjusted and monitored very carefully. And so medication is a powerful tool, but not an all effective tool, so to speak. It really is something that it has to be done in conjunction with indeed support. I keep coming back to that word support. It requires a huge amount of just caring for people to help them get through and indeed sometimes survive whatever is going on in their mental health status.
Well, and in that regard, many mental illnesses, when they are more acute phases, affect the organization and planning part of the brain. And so to take a medication regimen, anyone who has a serious illness, cancer or whatever, knows that a medication regimen can be complicated and you have to stick to it. Well, mental health meds are the same way, and it's often difficult to maintain that regimen. So even if someone wants to take their meds and they have the meds, it still can be challenging to forget for a couple of days, and then you decompensate, and then it becomes harder for you to focus. So that's where friends and family members can really be helpful and supportive for people that are, they can recognize when someone's struggling, and they can help them get back on track without shaming or blaming them.
And this is especially important when you factor in the statistic that a quarter at least, maybe many more, of homeless people have mental illness. How do you get them on a medical regimen and keep it going in the exact way as Jan mentions? At least a quarter of people in jail have some sort of mental illness, and how do you get care to them and get them on a medical regimen? So there are many factors, many layers in caring for people with mental illness on the medical side.
Right.
You bring up jail, and I know that NAMI in our local chapter especially works with law enforcement to help solve the problem of, for lack of a better word, unjust incarceration of the mentally ill.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe what the local chapter has done around that?
Well, we were involved early on with court coordinated services in developing what we call a mental health court. And that is a court where people with mental illness have been accused of a crime, especially if it's something that's not violent and something of a high level, can go through the mental health court, where the judge then works with them and mental health systems to find out what treatment they need, what help they need, what supports they need, and they report to the court regularly. It can help people get back on track, get the medications they need, get the therapy and support they need, and have an accountability for a while so that it becomes a part of their life, and then as they're being successful, they successfully graduate from that, they can move on and not have that on their record. Because having a criminal record, is also then another stigma that makes it hard for people to get services they need.
And it's a stressor, too.
Yes, exactly.
A corollary of that is that NAMI has worked very, very hard on, NAMI Yamhill County has worked very hard on, is encouraging the police departments, the various police departments to, and I would say the goal of every forward-thinking modern police department should be to have all of its officers trained in something called crisis intervention training. In other words, how does a police officer deal with someone in mental health crisis when he or she is at the front line of that crisis? And we're happy to say that departments are responding. The Yamhill County Sheriff's Office has a very clear goal of 100% training for its officers. It's not a simple thing to accomplish because it's not cheap. It requires training time and release time for training, and also training and paying someone to take the position of that particular officer while he or she is in training. So, and then funding the training itself. So it's a thing that we work hard to find ways to achieve. But it's one of the goals at that interface between public safety and the individual with mental health issues.
And then NAMI is asked to be involved in the presentation during the crisis intervention training, where family members can talk about experiences with law enforcement and what is helpful and what is not helpful, so that officers can really have an understanding of what families are dealing with and what's most helpful and not helpful.
And there's a program, isn't there, that if an officer has engaged someone who he or she thinks is having a mental crisis, there's someone they can call, some sort of...
Yes.
Tell us about that program.
There is indeed. You want to start?
Well, there is a crisis response team consisting of an officer plus mental health professionals who can go with them and help assess.
And there are folks that can be tapped. For example, in Yamhill County, there is a group of people from George Fox University that can be drawn in to help care for folks who are at the interface with public safety and their own crisis. That and of course the hospitals and the Providence and Willamette Valley Medical Center are finely tuned to for someone who might be brought in by the police. They're finely tuned to recognize a mental health crisis and try to deal with that separately from or perhaps de-escalate it from a criminal proceeding too.
Right, and so that's why the crisis number, which appeared, is a way people, if they're feeling they're having a crisis with themselves or someone with mental illness, can call that number and express that, and that can lead you to getting some support and help, either calling that team or calling, whatever happens to be needed for that situation.
And in fact, NAMI Yamhill County has created a survey form that we are encouraging the police to use to create an understanding of any particular person that may be coming their way or may have come their way, so that they know what to expect and what kind of issues they might be called on to deal with. And that's something we're trying to persuade other police departments to take up, to utilize as well.
And all this support is basically what helps keep people from ending up in jails and prisons due to their mental health conditions. And that's all funded through our county programs, which is funded through Medicaid. And so I don't know that everyone realizes how much that Medicaid funding, which supports people staying out of jail or who helps them acquire what they need as they're getting out, affects the crime, what's going on. And so when people end up in prison, then they end up with further stress and trauma. And unless they're getting help, they come out and they're actually worse off than they were going in. So whenever we can get people the help they need before they go in or as soon as they come out, and there has to be funding for programs that do that. And currently, the Medicaid funding is what provides the best mental health care. It provides more extensive care than private insurance.
And toward that goal, the crisis hotline that and maybe that slide can pop up again at some point is really critical. So there is a number sponsored through the county, through that kind of funding that Jan's just talking about, that people can call at any time, 24 hours 7, 24/7 for help if they feel a crisis coming on or they're in the midst of one. That crisis line could be, in fact, literally a lifesaver.
All right, very good. Wow, there's a lot here. I know we're not halfway through yet. Talking about the different programs that you have, can we jump to some of the support that you do?
Sure.
Indeed.
You have different programs, family to family. What is that about?
There are three educational, I guess I would put them in the educational category of programs that I would like to mention. One is family to family. It's a very formal, very effective program for folks who have experience in loved ones with mental health issues, to translate that information to other people, other folks who are just beginning to learn how to deal with loved ones in a crisis or in an ongoing mental health situation.
That's something that NAMI
organizes and runs and sponsors.
Yeah, it's a series of 12 weekly classes.
Yeah.
And it's for family, caregivers, and friends of individuals with mental illness to learn more about and learn about ways they can support and about resources that are available and what they themselves can do. Yes.
And there is a corollary sort of activity that NAMI sponsors called peer-to-peer, in which people who are themselves have mental illness and get together with other people who are either newly diagnosed or still struggling with how to deal with their own illness, and peers help peers, and that's another very effective program of NAMI. And go ahead.
No. And for those who have reached a point we call recovery, which in the mental health field, we're not talking about, oh, it's all gone and it'll never be there. Recovery is more that you're able to live your life in a way that you're not impeded by your mental illness and that you're feeling well. And so people who want to maintain their wellness, these support groups can really help them to have the social support from others to maintain that wellness. And it can make a big difference in terms of being able to, again, the organization and planning and being able to do all the things they need to do to maintain that wellness. Without support beyond medications and therapy, it's hard to maintain. Just again, like cancer. People who have cancer have physical needs, and those have to be taken care of. But there's also emotional and social needs that we provide them.
And there are two more that I want to mention in this category. The first one of those, the third one of this list is something called In Our Own Voice, where people who have mental illness go out and talk to folks in the community, to various community groups, classes in psychology at colleges, police groups, for example, anyone who perhaps doesn't fully understand and what it's like to live with and suffer from mental illness, and that's again a really critical way of helping people understand and getting past the stigma that we mentioned earlier.
It's like a very powerful format for someone to come and
Indeed.
stand up in front of a group and say,
Indeed.
I have mental illness, and this is what you need to know about it if
This
you're a
is
law
Exactly.
enforcement officer. Or,
Exactly. And here's what it's like.
another-
And I didn't choose this. Here's what it's like. It's a very important
dispels a
tool.
lot of maybe assumptions or incorrect
Yeah, it puts a human face on it.
thinking that people have around mental illness when somebody can stand up and say, this is the way it is, this
Yes.
is what it's like, and this is what I need, and this is the kind of help probably that I've gotten that works for me, and so hopefully they will inspire other people to just offer that same kind of support. So I'm hearing if families that are watching, that if they're dealing with someone that is mentally ill, they can get support through NAMI. Someone that's suffering from mental illness, they can come and they can talk to somebody that's in it with, and talk the real deal.
Yes.
And also be helped to get services. And then you talked about In Our Own Voice, and there's one more program.
And there's one more program. And it's one that we've actually touched on, but it's really a corollary of several of these, and that is it's the immediate situation where you have someone in crisis, you're dealing with a loved one, and how do you deal with this? And it's there are three support groups that run that you mentioned at the top of the show, and I wanted to bring that up again because for me that's probably the single most important thing that NAMI Yamhill County offers is these kind of support groups where you can sit in a facilitated situation, talk about what's going on with you, get help from other people who either are struggling or have struggled with similar kind of situations.
That's first and third Thursdays at 5:30.
In McMinnville and
That's
on
6
Saturday
p.m.
mornings in Newburgh.
Okay.
Yes.
And those are extremely important to many people. At one point, they were very important to me as well. So,
And actually, there's a third one in McMinnville. The first
Oh,
and third
okay.
Thursdays, but also the second Saturday of each month.
there you go.
All of them meet at Abacus House here in McMinnville. And then there's the other one on the
In
first
Newburgh.
Saturday in Newburgh.
Yes.
We've talked a lot about education and support, and then there's a third leg of what NAMI does, and that's
Indeed.
advocacy.
Right.
Should we dive into that? What's out right now?
Thanks for bringing that up. It's perhaps not one of the most visible things that we do, but it's both in terms of advocacy for our members and for loved ones, just in some of the educational programs, but also advocacy at the level of the legislature. Pleading for, I guess that's probably not an incorrect word to use, pleading for more support for various programs that affect mental illness, and that those things might be in addition to just direct funding for care, but also things that have to do with shelters and dealing with homelessness and dealing with other sorts of ancillary, corollary kind of things that can help people with mental illness do better and thrive. advocacy at the level of the local government, making sure that the programs that we see developing are the ones that are most helpful and most and are pursued as energetically. Nobody could ever do it quite as energetically as those of us who are perhaps on the front lines, but to make sure that those government programs are meeting our needs as well.
So you have the ear of the commissioners.
We think so.
County
Well,
commissioners. And who's the,
yes.
is there one that has responsibility to mostly to stay in touch with?
Well, I would say Silas Holleran.
Well, yeah, he's the head of Health and Human Services.
Health and Human Services, yeah.
And he interacts regularly with the commissioners, so there's that. Also, there are numbers of committees in our county that oversee or support various of these programs, and we have NAMI members as a voice on many of those committees, so that we can give the mental health perspective on some of the things that are being talked about. There's, whether it be in criminal justice, or whether it be crisis teams, or whether it be other mental health committees. NAMI members have stepped up to be part of those committees, and of course, we can always use more members to have a greater voice on some of those things. Because as decisions are being made about a program or about the funding, people are going to go with what they know, and NAMI can be a source of education in that regard. And so the advocacy really is also education. Last week we went to the Capitol, had a NAMI day at the Capitol, and met with our legislators, and we told them what some current concerns are about current legislation.
So what's up? What were you talking about?
Well, mostly we were talking about the Medicaid funding, and the importance of keeping Medicaid funding, because it really drives the mental health services in our state. Anyone who is on Medicaid, which is Oregon Health Plan, has access to mental health care. That expansion added so many more people to our county mental health programs. People are getting the services that were not before.
And did you see that yourself? You experienced that in our community, that suddenly people that you knew, or that once they were able to get help, you became aware of? Did you see that expansion yourself?
I think so. I
Yes,
think
well,
so.
I work part-time for family and youth programs in Yamhill County, and our programs have expanded. We have a wraparound program for high-risk youth, and there has been a big expansion in terms of the number of people we can serve in that program.
Mental health is a big concern of people in general at large. They see issues in our society around homelessness, and they're constantly asking what is being done. People are all usually generally for, yes, we want to have more help to treat and help and support people with mental illness. So it's a real deal right now in our legislature, and I'm
Yes.
so glad that you were down there advocating for that. Thank you.
And we also offered, as we do whenever we visit, that because we have access to information about mental health, probably broader access than a typical legislator has, that we offer to be an informational source for them. So if they have questions, if they're saying, well, I don't know, what do you think about this? Or I need some information about specific things, about PTSD or whatever, we can provide that
And
information to them.
legislators do take advantage of that. We
Yeah.
are very pleased to say that we have a credibility level there that's important to them as well as us.
Well, and we do host a candidates forum frequently. When there is an election coming up, we have a forum in which we invite the candidates to come and talk, and we ask some questions related to mental illness, and also let them know whoever is elected, we are a resource for them also.
Very good. We just have a little while, just a few seconds left, and we need to touch on the NAMI walk. So Paul, maybe you could bring up that slide, and let's go to that. It's,
Right.
what's the date?
We are all volunteers.
Yes.
And we don't get money from any sources except what we raise. And the major source is the walk,
This is the big one.
which takes place on May the 21st this year, and it's
Yes.
in Portland. People from all around the state come and walk. We ask people to make donations to encourage us to walk, or to show up and be a part of it.
All right.
Right.
Well, And that will support the work that you do, the wonderful work that
It
we've
does.
spent a half an hour talking about. And now that half an hour is gone. Thank you so
Right.
much for being here. And,
Thank you.
Again,
Yeah,
a
we
plug for
appreciate it.
the NAMI walk.
Very
Yay,
good.
thank you.
Thank you so much.